Well, the campaign is now nearing its last 2 weeks and a few days, and we're looking at the situation here. The Real Clear Politics average still has a 9 point advantage for Biden. Um, Rasmussen has a 5 point advantage for Biden, closing up substantially from the week before. Trump's approval numbers are still in the high 40s versus disapproval in the low 50s, around 50 or 51 or so. So, and the other aspect we have to look at is the fringe party vote is around 3% to 3.5% in most polling. And that's important because since this is a Trump versus anti-Trump race rather than a Trump versus Biden race in reality, we have to look at the fact that every vote for somebody other than Biden is effectively helps Trump in a sense. So I think that's something to look at. So another thing to take a look at here real quick is some battleground state polls. Now, an interesting pollster is out that does have a reputedly Republican orientation, but uses slightly different techniques of sampling, and it appeals to me a little bit because he in an interview yesterday on Fox News raised a point which I tend to wonder about, and that is how many people really are willing to sit around for 100-question polls. So I think by focusing the poll on a fewer but most essential questions and not getting every demographic detail one could ever imagine, you might get more people to actually answer the poll and get something more accurate. Well, apparently he's had a good reputation in previous elections, but we'll see how he fares this time around. I'll run through real quickly a few battleground state poll numbers to kind of give you an idea of how he differs from the Real Clear average, which includes a lot of polls that clearly have a left-wing bias, in my opinion. Florida, he has Trump ahead by 2, where the Real Clear average has him down by 1.4. Okay, Pennsylvania, he has Trump down by 2, where the Real Clear average has him down by 5.6. Okay, so Michigan has Trump up by 1, where a Real Clear average has him down by 7.2. Wisconsin has Trump down by 3, not so good there. Real Clear average has him down by 6.2, and finally Arizona has Trump up by 4, whereas the Real Clear average has Trump down by 4, an 8-point difference. So you can see that he's somewhat different in the others, and so it gives us a chance to actually pull out some wins here, assuming his predictions and tracking is correct. At this point, of course, Trump is back on the campaign trail full scale and doing, massive rallies again, like in the good old days. And the thing we have to look out for now is how the voting goes. Of course, early voting's in, and a lot of people are voting already. My opinion is the people that voted to date were probably people that were almost 99% certain to vote for whoever they voted for. Let's say back for the summer or something. I don't think they're late deciders. And so that's something to look at. I don't. The late deciders, the few that are, I mean, there's basically some soft support for both candidates that will poll one way or the other that might change their mind, and then there's a few undecideds. And that's really what the real battle is about in these key states at this point. And the other thing is just pure turnout. And that's going to be interesting. One bad thing for Trump is the fact it seems like the senior citizens have shifted to Biden for whatever reason. I think partly because the Trump campaign didn't focus enough on senior issues throughout this whole time, and until maybe it's too late in the game. They should have understood that these changes to health care will effectively take health care away from them. And I think that is something that perhaps that hasn't been clear in their head, and that the coronavirus problem will probably be over by the middle of next year, pretty much, or at least it'll be down to a low roar, and therefore voting for the next 4 years based on what happened in the past is kind of silly, and it's also misleading to think that if Joe Biden was president, the pandemic would have been handled better. That's absurd, but apparently some people have been fooled into believing that. And I would have to say that the campaign at times does a poor job of making their case on it, which I don't understand why they can't do that. But they seem to fumble and fizzle when it comes down to saying things clearly and forcefully on the subject anymore. So anyway, that gives you kind of a rundown of what I'm seeing at the moment. I wouldn't bet my life on Trafalgar, but I'd probably believe it more than I would Quinnipiac. So, and it seems like there's some movement in that area. I know that Trump is campaigning in Michigan to get today. So if it's as bad as the RCP average says, it's interesting that that's being targeted as much. But he did pull it out very narrowly last time. The other thing to consider on that is that John James, the Senate candidate up there, seems to also be running neck and neck with the Democrat incumbent. And being African American, can he pull over a part of the traditional African American vote and maybe also pull it over to Trump? Question. But that might be helpful. What's going on in Wisconsin's unclear to me. I would think that the USMCA agreement would be very favorable to a lot of people in Wisconsin farmers because obviously it will improve their sales of milk to Canada, I think, but dairy products. But we'll have to see how that, again, that's another one. So Arizona is very interesting. That Trafalgar is profoundly different than the other polls there. So we'll have to take a look on that one. The Senate races are very critical also, because unlike some people, I definitely believe in a plan B, which is to have a Dunkirk option, if you will, to live to fight another day rather than lose your whole force in France, so to speak. So my thinking is here that if the Republicans can hang on to the Senate by a slim majority throughout the next 2 years, it's probable that the worst of what could happen, and I've been talking about, won't happen. If the Democrats get in control, then it's up in the air. We'll talk about that issue if, in fact, we ever face it. I see no reason to go into that any further today. Why talk about negativity when there's still a chance that a turnout advantage can help us? The other issue is the mail-in ballot vote issue. It would seem that seniors would be the biggest group that would go for the mail-in option, given their supposed overwhelming concern about the virus and the fact that just convenience of avoiding standing in lines. So, and if mail-in ballots tend to be the ones that tend to get a raw deal, and because of people filling them out wrong and so forth, and other mix-ups, that could give a slight advantage in the ultimate count. We don't know if that's the case or not. It's really devastating to me that somehow Trump is losing the elderly vote. I mean, that given what's coming down the pipeline, I would think the elderly would be most upset about what is going to happen. And so I find that just paradoxical. But then weirdly enough, the young people, according to polling, again, if you believe polling, seem to be more favorable to Trump, relatively speaking, than the elderly. Not saying which one's ahead in a given poll, but just the tendency. And the rich seem to be more for Biden than they are for Trump. Yet, of course, Biden is going to particularly focus on raising taxes for the elderly. And anybody that believes that people that make less than $400,000 a year aren't going to get their taxes increased have got to be in fantasy land. Probably the same people are expecting a Trump landslide, both of which I think are very unrealistic. I mean, 400,000 probably would at best mean a family of four, and not an individual. And another thing to consider about that is he also says he's going to completely repeal the Trump tax cuts, which were mostly focused on people under that income level. And the complaint about the minor cut for the very highest income group was only designed to counterbalance the loss of the state income tax deduction that they had. So, I mean, to be honest about it, this is a lot of deception. Of course, it looks to me like the politics is always full of misinformation. And I would suspect at least half the people on all sides are voting on some kind of misinformation rather than a clear picture. Well, at any rate, I think that's about it. I mean, by all means, go out and vote for Trump and vote Republican for Senate, even if you can't stand Trump and aren't going to vote for him, because you don't. And by all means, vote Republican for the House. I mean, unless you just love your Democrat representative, if you have one, do you really like Nancy Pelosi? Because that Democrat is going to put Nancy Pelosi back in power. Think logically. That's the thing I keep getting frustrated with people. It's not about whether you like this person or not. The reason I vote against Nancy Pelosi is not because she has an ugly personality and is a mean witch, but the fact of the matter is the reason to vote against her is the policies that she's holding up the relief bill for purely political purposes, for example. So, at any rate, that's kind of my spiel for today, and give you a little update on where things are. We can only hope that Trump's aggressive campaigning improves his numbers and gets him up to within effective striking range of at least 2% in order to potentially pull an electoral victory. If you like these videos, again, give me a like. I think everybody can do that, is watching them. And if you're on a YouTube account, subscribe if you haven't already. And all for now.